The first step in controlling your speed is in the position of your foot on the accelerator. Press the accelerator, and as soon as you reach the desired speed, try to keep your foot as stable as possible in that position, if you're on a flat road, that is. Now, this may seem like the most obvious thing, but a tip to make that easier is to have your heel rest on the floor of the car. By doing this, you're anchoring your foot, locking it into place. If you don't do this, it'll become harder to keep your foot stable, especially if the road is bumpy. It's the same as with any other part of your body. Think about when you write. You usually have your arm resting on a table, your body, or something else. Now try writing without your arm resting on something and it won't be as accurate. Also, try not to drive with shoes that have very thick or hard soles because you won't feel the accelerator, so it becomes harder to judge how much you should press it. With experience, this will be less of an issue, but for beginners it is. Now, a thing that tends to surprise beginners is how little you need to press the accelerator. In almost all driving situations, you barely press it. Like here, I went from a stopped position at the beginning of the clip, and now I'm at 50 kilometers per hour. You can see that my foot barely moved. And that's the case even when going at higher speeds, like 100 kilometers per hour. I'm at 100 here, and I've just released the accelerator completely. Again, my foot barely moved. The only situations where you'd need to press the accelerator significantly is if you want to overtake a vehicle quickly, or if you need to get up to speed quickly when entering a highway, for example. So keeping your foot in a stable position is what you should do on a flat road. But of course, roads aren't always flat. So when going downhill, the steeper the road, the more you'll have to release the accelerator. And in some cases, if the road is very steep, the speed limit is relatively low, or especially when there's a combination of both, you'll need to brake. If you're driving on a road like this and you're already at the maximum speed before you start to descend, you might get away with just releasing the accelerator to maintain your speed stable. But on a slope like this, you'll need to brake, especially since the maximum speed is 40 kilometers per hour. Be careful with inclined roads at the exam, because it's very easy to go over the speed limit by too much and fail because of it. And in everyday life too, because there tend to be speed enforcement operations quite often in those spots. Also be careful when on gradual or gentle slopes. These are roads that are inclined, but sometimes not enough so that you can notice it. And in these cases too, it's easy to go over the speed limit by quite a lot if we don't let go of the accelerator a bit. If you're going uphill, then you'll need to accelerate. Now that too sounds really obvious, but a lot of students still tend to lose a lot of speed in those. So don't hesitate to press that accelerator. Now the impression of speed, in other words, the way you feel how fast or slow you're going, is relative to two things mainly. First, the speed at which you were going before you need to adapt to a new speed. For example, if you just drove on the highway at 100 kilometers per hour and you slow down to 60 or 50, you'll feel like you're crawling. It always takes a moment to adapt to a new speed, be it higher or lower. So in those situations too, you'll need to use your brakes because most of the time just releasing the accelerator won't be enough to get to the lower speed limit. And on service roads, those roads right next to the highway, speed limits are always lower than on the highway itself, but a lot of people tend to drive way over the limit. And that's because of the fact that it's hard to adapt to a lower speed, but also because since we see vehicles on the side going faster, we tend to adapt to their speed. So be careful to not just follow other people blindly, because in service roads too, there tend to be speed enforcement operations quite often. And the other thing that affects your impression of speed is the type of road you're on. When you're driving at 50 kilometers an hour on a wide, multi-lane, empty, and well-paved street like this one, you might have the impression of going too slow. If you're driving at the same speed on a tight street like this one, you'll have the impression of going too fast. So be careful on those types of roads, especially at the exam, because some people tend to go over the speed limit by a lot. People also tend to not respect the limits on lower speed limit zones, like 30 kilometers per hour, especially on busier streets. Now just a note for students that are scared of going on the highway for the first time. A funny thing that happens quite often is this. They freak out when they're accelerating to reach 100 kilometers per hour. After driving at 100 for a few minutes, their reaction usually is, "That's it. That's not that bad after all." And when they exit the highway and adapt to the lower speed limit, their reaction usually is, "This is way too slow." Well, that's the speed you were going at before you got up to the speed that you thought was way too fast. So if you're scared to go on the highway, don't be. Even though the speed is way higher on the highway, the risk of incidents is higher on city streets because even though the speed is lower, there's a lot more stuff happening. Intersections, traffic signs, other road users, and so on. Whereas on the highway, you basically try to stay centered in your lane and control your speed. Now at the exam, don't freak out if you sometimes go over the speed limit by a few kilometers per hour. Students tend to freak out even more when the speedometer is digital, because on a digital speedometer, you see the exact number, as opposed to a speedometer with a needle, where you see more of an approximative speed. This vehicle has both. On the digital you see 52, on the other one you see more or less 50. If you had to always stay precisely at the exact speed limit the whole time, you'd be looking only at your speedometer, which is not a good idea because there are things happening all around that speedometer. It's impossible to always stay exactly at a constant speed. Now I can't tell you how much over or even under the speed limit is tolerated because technically, if you're going 1 or 2 kilometers over, you're over the speed limit. But since it's impossible to always stay precisely at any speed, a few kilometers per hour over or under are usually tolerated. How much is tolerated may depend on where you're doing your exam. One thing though, is if you check your speedometer and see that you're a bit over or under, adjust. Don't just stay there, thinking that it'll be tolerated to always stay at that speed and get back as close as possible to the limit. I'll go into more detail about tolerance in the next video. And another way to control your speed is cruise control. I won't go into much detail on cruise control in this video, and the reason why I won't is because I'm not a fan. So what is cruise control? Basically, it's a system that you normally use when you're driving on a highway or national road. In other words, a road where you don't need to constantly start and stop or slow down. You're going at a certain speed, let's say 90 kilometers per hour, you engage the cruise control, then you can take your foot off the accelerator and the vehicle will keep going at that speed until you either disengage it manually or press the brakes. And here's why I'm not a fan. Because of the fact that you take your foot off the accelerator, I see two main problems. First, after driving for a few years, you've made the move of switching between the accelerator and brake pedals literally thousands of times. That move is programmed in your brain. So if you need to brake in an emergency, you'll make that move in a fraction of a second automatically. It's a reflex. However, if you take your foot off the accelerator, you'll probably position it in different places. Probably in a too relaxed position. Because that's the point of not having to have your foot on the accelerator all the time, right? So if you need to brake in an emergency, where is your foot going to land? You don't have that same reference of distance from one pedal to the other, so your foot might land on the brake, on the accelerator, in between the two pedals, anywhere really. You might even hurt your foot. And second, you have two physical connections when interacting with the vehicle, your hands and your feet. By taking your foot off the accelerator, you're losing one of those two connections that help you keep you focused on your driving. And after a while, that can lead to distraction. So if you need to brake suddenly, your reaction time may be reduced. Now, like most other automotive technologies, cruise control systems have improved over time and have more safety features. On some vehicles, the system can automatically adjust the speed depending on the speed of the vehicle in front and even brake by itself. But again, I'm not a fan of cruise control. I like to keep as much interaction with the vehicle as possible. But that's a personal preference though. Depending on your particular driving conditions, you might like it. So try it out and see for yourself. And let me know in the comments if you're interested in a video on cruise control. If yes, I'll do one. In the next video, I'll discuss speed limits in different zones. So stay tuned and see you soon.